According to the latest data from the Law School Admission Council, June LSAT test taker numbers are up 7.4% over last year, about 26,000 people in total. And a lot of people are running those numbers backwards. They're saying the surge is back, next cycle is going to be a bloodbath, apply everywhere, take the first offer you get, lock it in before it gets even worse, but it's wrong. If you read the full data, the number actually points the other way. June 2026 specifically was always going to have high test taker numbers due to the fact that it was the last remote LSAT before it goes back to in-person starting in August. Now, if you look at the first time test taker numbers, those were up only 3.9%. And that's the number that really tells you whether there is a new wave of applicants forming, because everyone who ends up applying to law school starts off as a first timer. And so you compare those numbers side by side, total test taker numbers up 7.4%, but brand new taker numbers up only 3.9%, almost half. The gap, of course, is repeaters. People who took the test already got counted, giving it another shot. That means close to 2/3 of the increase is retakes, not new people. Now, of course, it's true that some of those repeaters are gearing up to apply next cycle, so I'm not going to pretend that they're nothing. But the cleanest read on what new demand is like is actually the first-time test takers, and those grew only at about half the speed of the headline everyone's screaming about. Now, as I mentioned, June was the last at-home LSAT. Starting in August, LSAC is requiring almost everybody to take the LSAT in person at a Prometric testing center. They announced that back in February, and the reason is security. Overseas test-taking services were exploiting the at-home setup to cheat on the LSAT, and so LSAC pulled the plug on remote for the vast majority of test takers. The only exceptions left are approved medical accommodations, or if you live more than 180 miles from a testing center. And so June takers were always going to be higher because people who wanted to take it remotely, that was their last chance. It was pulling demand forward into June. People who would have taken it in August rushed for June because they had that last chance. And so I think August is going to be flat for that reason, roughly even with last year, maybe even a little bit under, because people who would have normally taken the LSAT in August took it in June to get ahead of the change. And before you tell me August will look small just because in-person seats are limited, LSAC has actually said they are adding in-person testing centers, and their goal is to have more in-person slots than the number of people who tested in each month last year. And so if August comes in flat against a bigger pile of seats, that's not a shortage, it's demand showing you where it really is. Now, here's what should change how you read every law school number for the next 12 months. Last October, LSAC published its early applicant numbers for this cycle we're now just finishing. Back then, applicants were up 33%, but typically, at that point in the cycle, they've only got about 15% of the applicants they're going to see by the end. And so you can't base your predictions based on that number. Early numbers always run hot because more schools are pushing early decision and rolling admissions, and so applications bunch up in the fall. If you look at this past June, applicants for the cycle only ended up about 9%, not 33%. So it dropped 2/3 on the way down as the cycle went on, but the headlines, of course, stayed frozen at the peak, overstating the numbers. The cycle before this one finished up 18%. This one's landing around 9%, and so the growth is cutting roughly in half from one cycle to the next, and test numbers are sliding the same way. Last September, we had about 23,000 test takers, up 24% over the year before. This June, only 7.4%. You've got to look at the overall trend. Now, last fall, across both the August and September LSATs, first-timers were up about 13%. This June, only 3.9%, and so things might be cooling down, not peaking. If we looked at the pandemic-era surge a few years back, it was the same thing. Applications spiked, and then a chunk of that demand drained right back out. I've seen this over and over, and there's a reason these things crest. I mean, think about what built the boom in the first place. LSAC's own surveys point to the moment we're in right now. People fired up about politics who want to fight it out in the courtroom. People worried about the economy and AI coming for their jobs. They're reaching for a degree that feels safe And those pressures are real, but they are a one-time step up in interest. It's not just going to rev endlessly. People went to law school and they decided for that, but it's not going to keep peaking and going higher and higher and higher over time. And so where I've landed on this is that I think next cycle is going to be flat. It's not going to crash, but it's not going to keep rising. Now, if you want to be in the best possible position going forward, no matter what happens in this cycle, whether numbers peak, whether they plummet, whether they level out and stay flat, the best move for you right now, of course, remains the same. You want to shoot for the highest LSAT score possible. When you have a higher LSAT score, you can get into better law schools, you can get more scholarship money. It'll give you more options no matter what you end up deciding to do. And of course, you can look at demand, you can look at what the competition is going to be, but none of that actually changes where you should focus your efforts, which are on your own journey, getting the best possible score, raising your score up. If you want my help, I'm happy to support you in your journey. I'm offering free LSAT tutoring for everybody watching this now or later. You can book that free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally at unpluggedprep.com/start. The link's below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG. I've also put together a free LSAT tutoring lesson. I've also put together a free LSAT cheat sheet to help you jumpstart your LSAT prep. You can grab that quick reference PDF on everything logical reasoning and reading comprehension. The link for that is unpluggedprep.com/cheat sheet. I'm happy to help you out. Again, grab it below the video in the chat, in my bio as well. For those just joining, I do these lives every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever you're watching this. If you find these helpful, of course, please spread the word. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these lives, and the algorithm doesn't really boost them because they can't run ads during them. So word of mouth is the only way this grows. Now, for those who aren't aware, there is a pending lawsuit against the Law School Admission Council. A law school applicant sued LSAC, contending they are engaging in unfair, monopolistic behavior. And the core of that lawsuit is what you spend to apply to law school. $215 is what you pay the Law School Admission Council before a single law school reads one word about you. Then you've got to pay $45 more for every school you send your application to. So let's say you apply to 15 law schools. That's almost $900 in fees before tuition, before a single school's own application fee even hits your credit card. And there's one thing that makes people stop cold about this. LSAC is a nonprofit. And now a federal judge in Philadelphia has ruled that the lawsuit calling those fees an illegal price-fixing scheme is moving forward. It wasn't settled. It wasn't thrown out. It is actually heading toward a jury. And LSAC tried to get this case killed twice, and this month the judge said no. But the coverage is missing the biggest part. LSAC already lost the one argument it most needed to win months back. In the ruling, everybody called a win. And I'm going to show you exactly what that was. And there is a number buried in all of this that's 100 times bigger than $900. It's the one that should actually change what you do this week. Most applicants get furious about the wrong number, and I'm going to show you the right one. And the headlines are getting it half right only. Start with what you're actually paying for here. If you are applying to law school, you don't send your own transcript to each school. You can't. You pay LSAC to do it through something called the Credential Assembly Service, or CAS for short. You pay $215 to switch it on. That subscription runs for 5 years, and then every school you apply to costs another $45 for LSAC to send them a report. It's with the same transcript, the same letters of rec. They package it up and forward it for $45 a school every single time. Now, you cannot apply to an ABA accredited law school without going through this process. There is no competitor. There is no second vendor you can pick instead. There is just one organization that sits between you and nearly every accredited law school in the country, and it charges you on the way in. It's like a tax you pay LSAC. Because it's mandatory, there's no opt-out, and there's only one collector. And this class action lawsuit says the price of that tax is not set by competition because there is no competition. It's set by those who benefit from it. According to the complaint, LSAC collected $93 million in those fees over 3 years from people who, by definition, have not yet earned a lawyer's paycheck. Most of them are in their 20s, taking on debt just to play the game. Now, put that in real terms, $93 million is more than the entire tuition bill for a couple thousand law students collected in fees by a nonprofit in only 3 years. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, and it's what this lawsuit's really about. Look at who actually runs the Law School Admission Council. It is the member law schools. LSAC is governed by trustees that the schools elect. And those same schools get LSAC's application platform for free. They're not paying to receive your file, you are paying to send it. And so follow the money here. The schools control LSAC. LSAC turns around and charges the applicants. The people with the least power and the most debt in this whole arrangement, they cover all of it. And the lawsuit goes one step further. It alleges LSAC handed out grants of up to $100,000 to member law schools. The complaint calls them kickbacks. It's money flowing back to the schools to keep them loyal to the system. Now, I want to be careful here because this matters. This is all an allegation. It has not been proven. LSAC, of course, denies it. And that is literally what this case now exists to test. But step back and look at the shape of this. An organization run by the law schools, charging the students, routing money back to the schools. So if you set out to design a system where the people paying have no say and no exit, it would look a lot like this one. Now, because LSAC did win the first round, we got to look at the details. Back in April, the same judge, John Murphy, threw the case out. He called the complaint implausible. He called it unclear and self-contradictory. And so you could read that thinking that LSAC walked away clean. But the actual ruling is a totally different story. Because in that same opinion, the judge agreed with the applicant on the two hardest things to prove in any antitrust case. First, he found concerted action. In plain English, that means he agreed this looks like a group acting together, not one company setting its own price. So that is the line between saying a business charged me a lot and a group fixed what I have to pay. The judge said that the applicant had plausibly alleged the second one. He also found that the applicant did have standing. That means he is the right person to bring this case. He was actually harmed in a way the law recognizes and can do something about. Big companies spend years and millions of dollars fighting just to win those 2 points. The judge handed both of them to the plaintiff, and yet everyone called the ruling a loss. But the only thing the plaintiff actually lost on was technical. He hadn't precisely defined the market. In antitrust, you have to draw the exact boundaries of what is being monopolized, and the judge said he hadn't been carefully drawing them. But then the judge said that the time to fix it is an amended complaint. He basically told the plaintiff to go back, tighten it up, and refile. And so the plaintiff did exactly that. He refiled a whole exhibit built just to define the markets the judge had said were fuzzy, focused right on what he had lost on previously. So LSAC, of course, moved to dismiss the case again, but the judge said no. So the case has survived, which is pushing it into discovery, which LSAC, of course, has been trying to avoid. Discovery is where both sides have to turn over the internal material, with including emails, internal financials, what the service actually costs LSAC to provide versus what they charge you for it. We're going to learn LSAC's margins here. Now, they might have to show those to the other side's lawyers, and that could show that the schools, of course, get the platform for free. Applicants pay for all of it. And so whether that $215 subscription and that $45 report actually just cover the cost of moving your file around, or whether the money applicants pay funds a much bigger machine that mostly serves the schools who run it and help to set the price. LSAC has never had to answer that in public, and they've been fighting to keep it sealed, but now it's going to get revealed. Now, of course, I would love to tell you that we could all read that. I'd love to dig into the details myself, but we don't get to see it yet because there is a protective order in this case, which means the documents that get exchanged stay sealed for now. We'll see whatever shows up in the public court filings down the line. And the schedule of the case, of course, points to trial in 2028. And so if you're applying to law school this cycle or next, this lawsuit will not save you a dollar. Set your expectations now. It's going to go quiet for several months where nothing visible happens. And that doesn't mean the case is dying, of course, but it's just how these things grind along. And so I want you to watch the arguments LSAC's lawyers make as this moves along. Antitrust cases produce some genuinely strange arguments. They're going to say, for example, our client's a nonprofit, and they could be charging applicants more than it does currently. So they're going to say, we don't overcharge students. We could have already overcharged them more than we actually do, which might actually hold up as a legal argument. I don't love that line of reasoning, but we'll see if the judge likes it, of course. Regardless, of course, what you should do in the short term doesn't change. Your path forward is simple. Put together the strongest law school application, get the highest possible LSAT score that you can. What you pay LSAC and fees is really just a drop in the bucket compared to what law school is going to cost. And if we can save you money on your law school tuition, that's going to do a lot more for you than worrying about a couple hundred or even $1,000 in application fees. And so if you want my help getting the highest possible LSAT score, getting into better law schools, getting more scholarship money, of course, your path forward remains the same. Get the highest possible LSAT score, and that's where I can help you out. I'm offering a free LSAT tutoring lesson for everybody watching this now or later. You can book that free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally at unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG. I've also put together a free LSAT cheat sheet to help you jumpstart your LSAT prep. You can grab that free cheat sheet at unpluggedprep.com/cheat sheet. Again, link is below, pinned in the chat, in my bio as well. Happy to help you out. I see some questions here in the chat. I will get to as many of them as I can. Feel free to drop them in. I see Fortress is asking, I want to get into schools like Yale, but I have a 2.4 GPA. Even if I get a 180 LSAT, I'm doomed. I hear you on that. It's a real concern, right? I mean, law school admissions is a function of your LSAT score and your GPA. And so the lower your GPA is, the higher you want your LSAT score to be. And I'll agree that, of course, with a 2.4 GPA, it is a real long shot to get into one of the top law schools in the country. That being said, if you could get a 180 LSAT and get unicorn softs in your application, you'll do a lot better than if you didn't have those things. Can't offer any promises or guarantees, of course, but if your GPA is already set, if you're already done with undergrad, then of course your path forward is to focus on your LSAT score. Can't promise you Yale, but of course, you still can get into a great law school if you get the 180, if you get the highest possible LSAT, and you can put together a strong application. Book the free tutoring lesson with me personally, and of course, I'm happy to talk you through what your plan could look like to get your score up. I see Faisal's asking, GPA affects your standing in my college. If you're below a 2.0 GPA, you will get academic probation. Okay, so then the goal becomes, if you're still an undergrad, don't get below a 2.0 GPA. Focus on your grades, especially if you're earlier in college. Of course, the LSAT is not going anywhere. Law school is not going anywhere. If you're a freshman, if you're a sophomore, and we have some high school folks watching these TikToks, and ultimately, I mean, if that's the case for you, if you're earlier stages, focus on maintaining a strong GPA, determine what your major is going to be, explore whether law school is the right path forward for you. Then in junior, senior year, of course, you could switch gears and focus more on the LSAT side of things. Rohan's asking, I've got a 2.7 in GPA in sophomore year, about to get to junior year. Any advice? Raise your GPA. We want you to get to at least a 3.5 plus or a 3.7 plus, depending on what law school you want to go to. Focus on keep maintaining top grades. Of course, that's counter to what you might expect me to say as someone who teaches the LSAT. Of course, you might think I'm just telling you get a high LSAT score, and I am saying get a high LSAT score, but first things first, GPA comes before that, just chronologically. And so maintain a good GPA, have an upward trend to offset your previous lower grades, and then of course, later stages you could switch gears to the GPA, to the LSAT. Nick is asking, what about a 3.4 GPA? What LSAT is strong for competitive schools? And so if you look at the requirements, the medians for the top law schools, the LSAT medians range from 170 to 174. The GPA medians are roughly all in the 392 to 399 range. And so if you're below a 392 on the GPA, you want to be above a 175 on the LSAT roughly to compensate. And then, of course, when you say competitive schools, the question is how you define those. Of course, there are many competitive schools that are not T14 specifically. You could look at T30, for example, and then the medians drop a little bit. But overall, you want to have a higher GPA if you got to offset, higher LSAT if you want to offset a lower GPA. Just scanning through for more questions. Feel free to keep those coming. Eugene Kim asks, I scored a 173 on the LSAT, but have a 2.7 GPA. Do I have a realistic chance of getting into a T14 law school, or should I retake the LSAT? I mean, I'll say this. A higher LSAT can help to offset a lower GPA, but only up to a point, right? There is a certain threshold at which your GPA is just too low. And so there are a couple of things you could do at this stage. Retake the LSAT. A 175 plus LSAT will do more to offset the lower GPA than a 173 will. You could also switch gears, switch focus to the application essays, the rec letters, the resume, optimize all of that. But the next step is to, I think, retake the LSAT short term. Little Lonely Planet's asking, I got a cold diagnostic of 160. Do you think getting a 175 at minimum is doable this cycle? Yes, I do. This cycle, I mean, we've still got several LSATs ahead of you. The LSAT's offered 8 times a year. Coming up, we've got August, September, October, and November, just this calendar year alone. So and then you've got January and February still within this cycle coming up early next year. And so to improve 15 points in the span of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months, definitely doable. I mean, your improvement's ultimately going to be a function of the amount that you study and the way in which you study. And so if your LSAT's a 160 as a cold diagnostic, it's a pretty good starting point. It's certainly higher than mine. I started off at a 152. I did end up at a 175, but it took me an entire year, and at least half of that was a complete waste of time. If I'd done it properly, I could have knocked it out in just a couple of months, because the LSAT is a test of pattern recognition, meaning that if you can spot the tricks and traps, you can avoid them. It all comes down to understanding how the test makers think and seeing it from their perspective. So book the free tutoring with me if you haven't already. We could talk through what your action plan could look like for your LSAT study plan whenever you're retaking or taking it or retaking it. During these calls, we look at your starting point, your goal score, your time frame. Then we map out an action plan to get you from here to there between now and then. I see a follow-up asking, I have no idea what my GPA is, as I was raised abroad and attended university in London. Well, the thing is that, honestly, LSAC has no idea what your GPA is either. Strangely enough, if you earn your GPA, if you earn your undergrad, your bachelor's abroad, law schools do not consider your undergraduate GPA because they don't know how to interpret it. They instead place all that emphasis, they shift that emphasis onto your LSAT score. And so the good news, it could be good news at least, is that your LSAT becomes relatively more important because it eats up that piece of the pie that would have been eaten up by your GPA. So focus on the LSAT even more so for that reason. Isabel is asking, does it make sense to go to law school if I know I don't want to be a practicing attorney? Great question. Well, I guess my question then is, why do you want to go to law school if you don't want to be an attorney? Not saying you shouldn't necessarily, but for most folks, that is the reason to go to law school. So think carefully about what your career goals are, what you want to do with the JD. There are some professions where having a JD can help, even if you're not working as an attorney directly, but figure that out before you go to law school, not after. Mr. Yeatman's asking, I've got a 4.0 GPA, starting my second year, my diagnostic test is a 125. Can I get to a 175 in 2 years' time? Potentially, yes. I mean, I don't ever like to place a lot of emphasis on a cold diagnostic because all it really tells you is that you have not yet learned the language of the LSAT, but of course, you can learn it and you can improve significantly over time. The LSAT, for many folks, is kind of like a foreign language. It's difficult to interpret, a lot of dense text to navigate, but you can learn the language of the LSAT. There are a limited set of question types, a limited set of patterns. The LSAT, logical reasoning, for example, you've got 15 different types of questions, including strengthen, weaken, flaw, parallel, resolve, and so on. There's also reading comprehension to work on. That's a whole third of the test. Then you've got pacing and time management, doing individual sections and full-length exams to build up your endurance. And so any given study plan will involve some combination of those different phases and different question types. And if you've got 2 years, of course, you can really make anything happen. I don't think it should have to take that long. You could really knock it out in 6 months at most if you really buckle down. But if you want to take it slow and steady, if you're earlier in the process, I think you mentioned you're in your second year, so you're only entering as a sophomore, you've got more than enough time to improve significantly. If you want to talk through what your study plan could look like for whatever your time frame is, you can book the free tutoring lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. We could talk through your plan together. Hike is asking, was the June 2026 LSAT curve good or bad? So the funny thing is, there is not a single June 2026 LSAT. LSAC administers several different LSAT test forms, several different versions of the LSAT in any given LSAT administration, because it's offered over the course of multiple days at different times. And if they just offered one, then of course you've got people the first day telling those on the second day what was on the exam, and they can't have that, right? So they're constantly remixing several different LSAT test questions simultaneously, and they don't even release the curves. So we don't know what the curve is. We never will know, and there's not just one curve as well. And of course, the LSATs are all equated, meaning that they are standardized so that somebody taking the LSAT on one day is equivalent to someone taking it on another day, as well as someone taking it a different month or year. Ultimately, of course, none of this really affects what you do. You just got to keep studying and get as many questions right as possible. Subam says, I'm here like every day. Love the titles. Glad you're enjoying. Happy to help. Fairly Physics asks, Steve, I was accused of cheating on the January LSAT, and now I have to retake the exam. Is this known to happen? I showed them my practice test, and it didn't make a difference. Wow. Really sorry to hear that. I'm curious what their evidence is for your having cheated. Unfortunately, they hold all the cards in this situation, so there's not a whole lot that you can do other than retake. I think your best course of action is just study hard, retake, and of course, you'll be taking it in person, I'm guessing, during your retake, given that the LSAT is going back to in-person starting in August. As a side note, folks, one way that you can prevent this sort of thing from happening is you take your practice tests inside the LSAC Law Hub platform. That way you are logging your results and you have that evidence to point to. So let's say, for example, you take the official LSAT and you get a high score, like a 175 plus. If you have practice tests in Law Hub directly, where you also scored in that range, that's evidence saying, hey, I'm capable of it. I've done it in the past. In contrast, if you take your practice tests in a paper physical book or in ChatGPT or whatever, or some third-party unofficial platform, they don't necessarily have all that data to point to. Yet another reason why I recommend taking your practice test in Law Hub, aside from getting familiar with the interface, the look and the feel, the software, the functionality of what test day is going to be like. But again, sorry to hear what happened. Again, just do your practice in Law Hub and knock it out next time. Mood's asking, how long should I study for a 170 LSAT score? Is 4 months enough? It could be. Where are you currently scoring right now? And how many hours can you put in per day and per week? So in other words, how much time can you put in and what's your starting point? Those are the missing pieces of that equation to determine whether it's going to be enough. I mean, 4 months could be enough, but what kind of support are you getting? Have you taken any prep courses? Have you gotten any coaching, or are you just self-studying with LSAT for Dummies and watching videos? I mean, the thing is that when you're studying on your own, you don't know what you don't know. But once we add that support into the mix, there's usually a pretty quick score boost, meaning there's going to be a lot of low-hanging fruit. A lot of folks are under a lot of common misconceptions regarding the different LSAT sections and question types. And when they come to us, they're confused, for example, about the difference between necessary assumption questions and sufficient assumption questions. There are some prep companies, not going to name names, but they lump these question types under the catch-all category of assumption, but they're asking you for very different things. Necessary assumption questions are like a very specific kind of must be true question. They're asking you for what needs to be the case in order for the argument to work, meaning if that thing were not the case, the conclusion would fall apart given the evidence. In contrast, you've got sufficient assumption questions asking you for what new information, if true, would guarantee the conclusion, leaving no ambiguity at all. And that's just one example of several, but we can often identify and address those weak areas, those misconceptions, those gaps in your foundation, and then that usually leads to a pretty quick score boost. And so if you want to get some support on your study plan, make sure there aren't those kinds of gaps, then you want to get some support, book the free tutoring with me, unpluggedprep.com/start. If you're not ready for a call yet, you can grab the free PDF download of my LSAT cheat sheet. I'm giving it away. The link to grab that is unpluggedprep.com/cheat sheet. Again, link is below the video, pinned in the chat, in my bio as well. Johnny says, I'm going to the Abraham Lincoln University of Law without the LSAT. Haven't heard of that one before. I would tread carefully. There are some less reputable law schools that are not accredited by the American Bar Association. And the problem with these law schools are several. You don't have the quality control or consumer protection in terms of what are their bar passage rates, what are their employment outcomes. The American Bar Association, for all its faults, requires law schools to submit a lot of data on their outcomes, and the law schools have to maintain good outcomes for their students in order to maintain accreditation. And for any American Bar Association accredited law school, you can look up the stats in terms of what percentage of their graduates got a law job requiring a JD within 9 months of graduation, what percentage of their graduates were able to pass the bar on their first attempt or within 2 years. You can also look up the requirements to get into these law schools and get scholarships as well. You can look up the LSAT medians, the GPA medians, and see what percentage of students got unconditional scholarships or conditional scholarships. When you go to a law school that does not require have these requirements or is not accredited, another downside is that you are often only able to practice law or pass the bar in that given state. Your law degree, in other words, would not be portable to other states. And of course, you never really know if you're going to need to relocate for some reason. So tread carefully. Additionally, even for the law schools that do not require the LSAT, you're limiting your ability to get scholarship money, because law schools typically award scholarships based on the strength of your numbers. If you can apply to a law school with an LSAT or a GPA above their medians, law schools will reward you to attract you to attend their school specifically by giving you scholarship money. If you don't have an LSAT score to submit, you're not giving them the same incentive. So just something to keep in mind there. Subom's asking, I have a 3.75 GPA and going for a 175 LSAT. Do I have a good chance at a T14? Like Harvard, for example. Okay, so a 3.75 GPA is good but not great. And I say not great just because of ridiculous grade inflation. The top 14 law schools, their GPA medians tend to be in the 3.9 range. And so a 3.75 GPA is below that, so you want to have a relatively higher LSAT to compensate. If you had a 175, would that be sufficient? Maybe. It's above median, so it gives you a shot. Harvard's median LSAT's of 174, so you'd be a touch above that. The higher you can get it, the better. Of course, I would never have one-itis on Harvard in particular. I would recommend applying to a wide range of schools, and if you want T14, I would just blanket the T14, apply to every single one of them. HB's asking, hey man, what's your thoughts on BU for undergrad business? I'm going there next year. Cool. I mean, you can major in literally anything and go to law school. Doesn't matter what you major in, whether it's business, English, sociology, STEM. The one thing I'll say is that law schools want good GPAs, and some majors have more grade inflation than others. I wish it weren't the case, but it is. And so if law school admissions is your sole goal, your sole focus, then you want to maintain a high GPA and take the classes that are going to give you easy A's. And if you're already in a position where you're not getting easy A's, then you might want to take some community college classes over the summer in easier classes just to boost up your GPA a little bit. That's a backdoor way to get your GPA up. Just scanning through for more questions here. Feel free to keep them coming. I'm picking the ones I think I can give them the most useful answer on, so apologies if I don't get to everybody's. I don't know the stats for every single law school in the country off the top of my head. There's over 200 of them. If you want to look up your chances or stats at any given law school, just look up the American Bar Association 509 reports. Just Google X Law School 509, and then you'll see what their medians are. And if you're below the medians, it's harder to get in. If you're above the medians, it's easier to get in. If you're below on the GPA, you want to be above on the LSAT to compensate. That makes you a splitter applicant. And good news is law schools love splitters. They actually weigh your LSAT score more heavily than your undergraduate GPA because of the US News rankings and because of rampant grade inflation, as well as the fact that GPAs are earned in wildly different contexts. A GPA in STEM is not really equatable or equivalent to a GPA in English or sociology. And so because it's apples and oranges comparisons, they discount that GPA in favor of the LSAT, which is more apples to apples because everyone's taken the same LSAT and they're taking it within a relatively short period of time, within 5 years before it expires. Whereas in contrast, your undergraduate GPA, you might have earned it last year, you might have earned it 10, 20 years ago. Oh, I can't resist this one. Mr. Eatman's asking, would you say AI is good to generate LSAT questions? No, I would not say that at all, in part because AI is unreliable. It makes mistakes occasionally, and you're never going to know when it makes those mistakes. It's getting better and better, of course, but there's no reason to resort to AI for LSAT because there are thousands and thousands of real official LSAT questions available to you. You can get access to 4 full practice tests for free on the LSAC Law Hub platform. Just create a free account on there. Those are all vetted official quality checked questions. Then you get all the other questions with a Law Hub Advantage subscription for $120. You get a full year of access, and you get all the other 8,000 or so LSAT questions. Stick with the real deal. Don't resort to the fake stuff. Your LSAT score is too important to be left to AI. Misfits asking, can you elaborate more on how to study for reading comprehension? And so, okay, so reading comprehension is a whole third of the LSAT. Some people say you can't improve at it, and they couldn't be more wrong. You get 4 passages on the reading comp section. You get natural science, social science, humanities, and law as the broad topics. One of those topics applied to each passage. But the thing is that the topic never really matters. What matters instead is the structure of the passage, how they go about making their argument. And so what you want to do is you want to think about how can I understand the underlying ways that LSAC goes about making their arguments regardless of the topic. You have a limited bucket of structures they use, like for example, there's an old theory followed by a new theory, or there's a thesis, antithesis, and then a synthesis, like a pro, a con, and a compromise between the two, for example. There's like 5 others like that. And so if you understand those common structures, then when you see a new passage, you can automatically relate it back to the structures of the passages you've seen in the past. That's the first thing I'll say. Get away from the topic. Don't get mired in the details. Focus on the structure. The other thing I'll say is that a lot of folks tend to get bogged down in the details within a passage, but what you want to do is focus on how the author goes about making their argument. So first and foremost, focus on the viewpoints, focus on the author's opinion. If you could leave the passage with only one central idea, what would that idea be and why? You can then use that articulation of the main idea to knock out the general global questions like main idea, primary purpose, passage organization, title, tone, author's opinion. You knock those questions out first. The questions about the details, you can always go back and find them later to help you solve a particular question. Then finally, you save the general, more inferential questions for last, the ones that require a bit more reading between the lines. But knock out the global questions first. Do the questions in the order that works for you. Don't take a lot of notes. It takes time to write things down, takes time to read things, and what you write down ends up not even being useful to solve the questions. And so if you want to talk through adapting all of this general strategy to your personal situation, Misfit, yes, I do offer LSAT tutoring. You can book a free tutoring lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. The link to book that free tutoring with me is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG. I've also put together a free LSAT cheat sheet covering my best strategies for both logical reasoning and reading comprehension. You can grab that free cheat sheet at unpluggedprep.com/cheat sheet. The link again is below the video, pinned in the chat, in my bio as well. Happy to help you out. I see Braden's asking, why doesn't US News just rank law schools by their score band? Why does LSAC even include a score band on your score report if they're only reported by the single number? Okay, so those are 2 different questions here. Why doesn't US News just rank law schools by their score band? Well, if US News only ranked law schools by their score band, I think that the rankings wouldn't change enough year by year. And US News loves to tweak the rankings every single year to generate news, to generate clicks, to get headlines, to get more web traffic for their ad revenue. And so they kind of mess with the ranking every single year. They adjust the formula every single year. And just to show how ridiculous these rankings are, they have even admitted that they decide the formula based on what will generate certain results. So in other words, they think about what order in which they want to rank the law schools, and then they adjust the formula to generate their desired outcomes. So not at all scientific, not at all valid, would not pass muster in any sort of proper scientific or academic context. And they also don't want to rank the schools on one single metric like LSAT. They also consider GPA, employment outcomes, bar passage rates, number of books in the library, as well as the prestige or reputation of the school. Flawed in so many different ways. Of course, you can just disregard the rankings entirely, which I think that you should do, of course. You also have the above the law rankings, which focus solely on employment outcomes, which is relatively better, I think. Still not perfect, of course. To your second question, why does LSAC include a score band on your score report? It's because LSAC, for all their faults, they're actually really good at what they do and very precise in what they do. What LSAC is doing when it comes to the LSAT is the science of psychometrics, the science of standardized exams, which involves a lot of detailed data analysis. And so what they do with LSAT score reports is they are basically saying to everybody that when you have a given LSAT score, there's going to be natural variation in how you perform. And so if your official LSAT score is, say, a 170, for example, you're not going to hit a 170 on every single LSAT. If you took the LSAT a dozen times, there would be some fluctuations in your score. One day you get a 167, one day you might get a 173, and the average would be roughly around a 170. If you imagine a scatter plot chart, you'd be around a 170, but you'd be hovering a bit above, a bit below. And so what they're saying is that while your official score might be a 170, you take it a couple times, you'll score a bit above and a bit below. So what they're saying to law schools is that, hey, this person, we give a rough estimation of where they're at, but take it with a grain of salt, is what they're ultimately saying. For your practical purposes, you got a 170, but for the data analysts, there's a rough range around that. They're saying that you might do a bit better or a bit worse if you were to take it again. In terms of prices for our LSAT tutoring services, to answer Yeet's question, we personalize every program to the student considering your starting point, your goal, and your time frame, because everyone's got a different goal and a different degree of support they're going to need to reach their goal between now and their target test date. And so if you want to talk through what your plan could look like, you can book a free tutoring lesson with me, unpluggedprep.com/start. We could talk through it more together. And yes, we can personalize a program for just 1 month to Hello World's questions here. I'm guessing if you're taking the LSAT in August, we'll take a more intensive boot camp style approach with live coaching several days a week, maybe even every single day, depending on what you need. For students taking the LSAT in September, October, November, we'll spread it out a bit more depending on how far off your LSAT test date is. Grady's asking, would a 3.90 GPA be too low for a top 14 law school? I wouldn't say it's too low. It's on the lower end, roughly. It's on the bottom end of the T14. The T14 GPA medians could be as high as a 3.99. They'll probably hit 4.0 in the next year, I'm guessing, given GPA inflation. But if you're on the low end for the GPA, you just want to be above on the LSAT side to compensate. And so the LSAT range in the T14 goes from 170 to 174. Schools like Harvard and Yale being on the high end at 174 on the LSAT medians, of course. And so you want to be above that, maybe hitting 175 plus to offset a relatively lower GPA. Not that a 3.9 is low or anything, but it's relatively lower just given the crazy GPA inflation. By the way, folks, for those just joining, I do these lives every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever you're watching this. If you find these helpful, please spread the word. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for the lives, and the algorithm doesn't really boost these because they can't run ads during them. So I do appreciate your support, spreading the word, sharing this to your TikTok socials, sharing this in any group chats you're part of, prelaw societies you're a member of, Discord, subreddits, Facebook groups. The more this grows, the more I will expand it over time. I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific. See you all then. In the meantime, all the best. Take care. Thanks for joining.